Okay, welcome back. This will be video 25, New Testament context. We're starting in Matthew 21:12-17. It says, Jews, as in Pharisees, priests, scribes, etc., have made my house a prayer, a den of thieves, with your money changers, pigeon dealers, and other things it mentions. And I cross-reference that to John. And there are three quotes in this section. The Psalms 69 is quoted, but I think that came from John. So, at any rate, it says that in John, the zeal for your house will consume me. Then I say in Psalms, the context is Christ crucified, plus the actually Jews from Christ at that point removed from the book of lives. So the nobles, the leadership, and then we'll look at Mark and the Isaiah, so on. So it's a pretty long thing with multiple prophecies kind of hooked together. So it looks simple, but probably isn't. It's only 5 verses. 21:12-17. Okay. Then Jesus entered the temple and sent out the temple all the buyers and sellers, and overturned the tables of money brokers and the stands of pigeon dealers, and told them, it is recorded, my house shall be called a house of prayer. And that is Isaiah 56:7. But you have turned it into a den of thieves, 7:11 in Jeremiah. So that connects Isaiah 56:7 to Jeremiah 7:11 in that context. They also brought blind and lame people into the temple, and he cured them. But the chief priests and professors, or scribes, observed the miracles which he had performed, and hearing the young men cheering and exclaiming in the temple, Hosanna to the Son of David, they became mad with indignation and asked him, do you hear what these are saying? Yes, said Jesus in reply to them, have you never read that out of the mouths of children and sucklings I have attained praise? That's Psalms 8:2. Then leaving them, he went out of the city into Bethany and there lodged for the night. Now the point is, here again, this Jews against Christ, the chief priests, Pharisees, professors, elders, so on and so forth. They observed the miracles. So here he had been, he had just raised Lazarus from the dead. He had healed all these people at will. Now it says they brought them into the temple. So it's like bringing it right into your face and saying, okay, well, you know, so far he's done this outside of the church, if you want to think of it that way. Now he brings it in and says, and puts it right in their face. Here, I'm Christ. In other words, you should believe on me because of all the miracles you see. After all, who else raises people from the dead? So they understood that he could heal people, and they couldn't do it. And it says they were mad with indignation. So of course they were indignant because you know, if ever, like it said in the other one, if everybody goes for Christ, they'll leave the synagogue, in other words, and they'll start forming their own churches, their own assemblies, which is all it means. And then we'll lose all this money and income, and basically the synagogues will fold because no one's going to come to them. So we'll lose our business, and their business was making them a lot of money. And that's all that it was about. It's all the synagogue was ever about. The temple of God was worshiping Christ in a spirit of truth, but they obviously weren't doing that. So in other words, they didn't really have authority over the people, because to have authority over the people, you would have had to have been teaching the message, the law, and all that in the spirit and in truth, and they weren't doing that. So it was the same concept I said before about law today. If your leaders who supposedly have the authority over you, your judges and all this justice system are actually breaking the law themselves, then how do they have authority? If the government doesn't follow the Constitution and laughs at it, basically, which I think George Bush did, so it was just a piece of paper, well, how does that give them authority over you, see? They don't have authority, but that's what it means by Satan taking the kingdom by force. that's what they're doing. That's what they've been doing. They've been by force ruling over people because they're the leaders. They're the ones that have the money and can put everything together and make it happen. And they control the soldiers so they can force it. So that's the whole idea of ruling by force. So let's look at this John. That's 2:13 to 17. Now the Passover was near. Let me make sure that's 2. Yeah. Jesus went up to Jerusalem, entered the temple, and found the dealers in oxen, sheep, and pigeons, as well as money brokers, transacting their business. You see? Same thing is going on today. The churches are businesses. They're all incorporated under the state. And then some of them have tax exempt under the state and federal. So they're all businesses. That's all it is. It's all about entertaining people. And people go because they like entertainment. Then, having made a whip of cords, he drove all out of the temple, including the sheep and oxen. He scattered the money. So he had sheep and oxen in the temple. Scattered the money, overturned the stands, said to the pigeon dealers, "Take these outside, do not turn my Father's house into a market." His disciples were then reminded that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." That's Psalm 69:9. We'll look at that. The Jews then addressed him, asking, "What proof do you show us doing this? Demolish the temple, and in 3 days I'll rear it." And of course the Jews in that are the Jews against Christ, the one running the temple and running this business of these selling the sheep and oxen, the pigeon dealers, and the money brokers. It's business. So they're getting ready to lose their business if everybody believes in Christ. And they can't really deny it because he's raising people from the dead and healing them, and they can't do any of that. All they can do is make up what the law is supposed to be. And it says the disciples, though, afterwards when he's raised from the dead, they remember that he said this, and they believed the scriptures as well as the statement of Jesus. So the statement of Christ that he would raise himself in 3 days was what they were getting at, and the scriptures that they're referring to is Moses, the prophets, and Psalms, which teaches about the first and second coming of Christ. But in this point, it was the first coming that they're talking to, and the scriptures that refer to all these things. So this is what all these quotes go to put it all into context. You have to look up all these quotes, connect back to where it came from. So we'll go to, alright, so that was John 2:13 and 17, which we just covered. That goes to Psalms, that's a quote of Psalms, but from John 69, and it's, I've got on there 8 to 30. Context is Christ crucified, and Jews from Christ removed from the book of life, which I said that was described in Zechariah, and Jeremiah, I mean. Psalm 69, 8 to 30. Alright, so let's go to Psalm 69. It's interesting because there's multiple sections here that all link back. Of course, there's a lot of links from Psalms up to the New Testament. So, "For I have suffered reproach, my face has been covered with shame. I became to my brother a stranger and unknown to my mother's son. For the zeal for your house has consumed, your insulters' abuse fell on me. So I wept in depression of soul, and they threw that on me to insult. When I took for my clothing a sack, from them I was subject to scorn. Against me the nobles conspired." So the ones that have the money, that are in power, and that have the assumed authority. "And satires the drunkards composed. But I pray to the life for good times. In your great kindness answer me, God, and in your faithfulness save." Okay, so the nobles here, of course, are the Jews against Christ. Now, here's what I said. You look at the quotes from the New Testament, well, you can see who it's talking about over there. It just said, you know, the leaders chief priests, the elders, all this kind of thing is who he's talking to. So that when it says nobles over here, it's quoting that. So obviously it's putting that into context that from John in this instance, but all these connect together. That the nobles he's talking about over there are Jews against Christ. So the same thing over here, the nobles are Jews against Christ. But this is house of Judah. The nobles of the house of Judah. His people, he came to his people, and that's who he's talking about here. So that's how you put what's in Psalms in context. Now you can look forward and backward. And I wrote on here, I guess I mentioned the verse 28, and that's where it says, and all this is, of course, in context here, my tyrants abused you. So, and then 22, when I hungered, they gave opium. When I thirsted, sharp acid to drink. Of course, I'm in the Farrar, but that's actually laudanum. Laudanum, I guess you call it. It's an opium drink. It's usually mixed with wine, but I think the sharp acid here, they mixed it with vinegar, so it's opium and vinegar in this case. And then the next one, make their table before them a trap, a punishment to them and a snare. If you recall that, that's the Jews against Christ from Romans 11:10. And then if you go to the next section here, 28, so we're still in 69. Let them add fury to passion, let them not come to your rest. Blot them from the book of lives, which those quotes go right back to the 40 years in the desert, the ones that made the golden calf. So it's 12 tribes in context, blotted from the book of lies because they would never follow his law, and so on and so forth. So it says the same thing over and over and over again. And of course that's Matthew 27:25, where they said, let his blood be on us and our children. So that links up to that. Now, there's also mention Christ the Rock in this section, and of course the idea that we're talking about Israel, the 12 tribes. If you just back up to 68:27 on Israel's walls, Benjamin mentions Judah, Zebulun, Naphtali, blah blah blah. You just keep backing up, you see more that's actually an end time. So if you have all this stuff in your Bible, that's you can just look and see the context as you go along. It's easier to see where you're at and put things in context properly. So if you back up to 60, chapter 60 in Psalms, and you scroll down, you'll notice down here in 8 and 9, talks about Manasseh, Ephraim, Judah, plus it mentions Edom, Moabite, Philistine. So, and then it mentions the rock, the rock, the rock, and so on and so forth. So, you got all this information here. You just have to kind of look forward and backward to get your context. There's more about the 12 tribes if you go forward and so forth. But at any rate, we know it's 12 tribes, we know it's House of Judah because, like I said, where we came from, put it in context. So let's go on. Mark, let's go back to Mark 11:15-17. And this was about the fruit, which I said before. Let's just read this. The fig tree. So he went to see if he could find anything on this fig tree. On coming to it, found nothing but leaves, so it was not a good figure. Then addressing it, he said, never from you let anyone eat fruit from you. And his disciples heard him. But this referred to the bad figs of the house of Judah, which was these Jews against Christ. So, said, then he entered into the temple, expelled the buyers and sellers, overturned the tables, same concept. And then he quotes same verses, Isaiah 56:7, Jeremiah 7:11. He says, when the chief priests and professors, they planned how they could murder him, for they were afraid of him, because all the masses were struck with admiration at his teaching. So again, when Pilate said that he didn't see anything wrong with Christ, and he figured it was just because they were jealous that they brought him up, and then of course that's why he washed his hands of killing him, because they didn't see any reason to kill him, and they were just indignant and jealous and so on and so forth, and they were going to lose their income and their control over the people if they recognized Christ, that really was him. So, you know, all plays together. Alright, and then I said, okay, that's, we'll look at that quote, Isaiah 56:7. I said, context. It's not house. What was it? Okay, 56:7, yeah. House of prayer, yeah. Context is house of prayer for lost Israels, or lost sheep of the house of Israel, the nations of the 12 tribes, though I think it's generally what it means. It's not a globalist meaning, as church teaches. And this is where it starts out. Men of foreign birth who join the Lord and serve and love his living name shall be to him for sons who keep his rest unbroken and hold his treaty firm. They shall reach my sacred hill, that's New Jerusalem in this case, joy in my house of prayer, and thereupon my altar, their gifts and offering place for my house. A house of prayer shall be called for every tribe. And that has a couple of quotes up to, we came from Mark and then Matthew 21:13. For thus the great Lord says, when lost Israel I collect. Again, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. I will collect with him, beyond him my select. So really that's the lost sheep in context. He's talking about collecting, plus his select, which I think are probably the 144,000 at the end that he's talking about. So, but, you know, whatever. Still, the context actually of that section is lost sheep of the house of Israel, which is exactly what it said in Matthew, which is the whole point. It does look like it's others, but then that also links to John 10:16 as well. So, in context, I would say that puts it in context itself as being the lost sheep of the house of Israel, which he's talking about collecting together with the house of Judah, which is why he told the house of Judah to go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Now, if you look at Jeremiah 7:11, the other quote, context is all Judah's house of Judah is made the temple a den of thieves. Then it says, verse 11:28, do not pray for them, and they were removed from the book. But then it expands, if you go on through Jeremiah, to the house of Israel, house of Judah, to be judged, put into captivity, restored, and brought back under Christ. Because that Jeremiah, like I said, in chapter 23, and then 31, 32, and 33, it says it 4 times, and quotes Jeremiah as well as this Hebrews 8:8, where they would all be brought back together in the end time. So, the context of Jeremiah multiple times is about the all 12 tribes being brought back together. So let's look at 7:11. Has this house upon which my name was invoked become a den of wild beasts in your eyes? Have I become a show also? The ever-living asks. Go, however, now to my house at Shiloh, where I fixed my name formerly, and see what I did to it because of the wickedness of my people Israel, and certainly now you have done all that they did. He says, I've spoken, I called to you. They're not following God's law. They've shed innocent blood, it says above, followed seducing gods, if you just look up. If you do justice between a man and his neighbor and do not oppress the foreigner, that's verse 5. So these are all the things they were doing. Of course, you can read all this. But if you just back up, for sure, you can see the context is house of Israel, house of Judah. He mentions the same thing. This is in chapter 5. For the house of Israel has been false with the house of Judah. They were false. Preachers have no spirit, no message came from them. They invent it for themselves. And he says they'll consume the house of Israel. And then he mentions the vines and the figs in 17, so that's 5:17. In those days, because you serve God, then he says 20, house of Jacob and Judah. So we all know this is the remnant mentioned over in 6 verse 9. Glean the remnant of Israel like a vine. See? So that's why I said I think his select, maybe he was talking to, the context could be the remnant, you see. But it talks about their country being destroyed, priests being false, same thing we saw in Zechariah. Appointed watchmen. So, and about Israel being divorced, that was, if you recall, we mentioned that was chapter 3, verse 8. Perverse Israel committed adultery, I would divorce her, so I divorced her. But slide Judah. So, house of Israel, house of Judah, regarded it not, whored like her, and whoredoms became more than all. So both of them in context. But then at the end, return, says the ever-living, for I will come to you and collect you, one from a town, two from a family, bring you to Zion, give you thoughtful shepherds, and they will attend you with knowledge and skill. And fruitful in those times, they shall no more demand the ark. That's 15, 16, 14, 15, 17. That period they shall call Jerusalem the throne of life, and all the heathen will trust on her with the name of ever-living at Jerusalem. No more go after perversities. And then in 18, in those times the house of Judah will march with the house of Israel. Okay, all 12 tribes back together. And I will reflect where I can put you with your children. Give you a beautiful country. So where's the 12 tribes all back together, marching from the land of the north to the country of Asher, to the estates of their forefathers. All 12 tribes. And then, of course, he mentions no more war, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so obviously that hasn't happened, and it's all just back and forth as you go through here, talking about the things they did. They were planted a perfect vine, a true stock, wild vine. That's back in chapter 2, 21. But at the beginning, verse 1:5, at the time of your formation in the belly I knew you, and the time you came from the womb I consecrated you, I appointed you a preacher to nations, speaking about Jeremiah. So Jeremiah formed in the womb. The concept seen many times. Branch of the almond tree in verse 11. It's 1:11. So, here again, the standard. And then, like I said, the Book of Lives. I guess I missed getting to that one. Yeah, well, the land is going to be judged. So we're in 7, and the end of chapter 7. In that period, I bring out the bones of the king of Judah, and the bones of its nobles, the bones of its priests, the bones of the preachers, and the bones of the inhabitants of Jerusalem. So that kind of sounds like maybe connected to the dry bones. Then death will be preferred to life. That's verse 3. By all the fragments of the remnants of this wicked tribe, in every place where the splintered fragments are. And 8, we are educated for we possess the laws of the ever-living. But why then is the lying pen of the recorder made for lies? You're educated, cause shame, terror, and disgrace, for they reject the word of the ever-living. And what can their education do for them? So they're educated, they've got this leadership position of authority, but it doesn't do any good. From the preacher to the priest, they all practice deception. That's verse 10. And 13, I'd reap them, but there are no bunches on the vine. See? No figs on the fig tree. And the leaves are withered, however I will transplant them. Alright, the transplant, the few that are left over, in other words, The other ones, he burns in the fire, he takes their name out of the book of life, and that's the concept. Here, still, it's absolutely, the figs right there, in this section especially, are referring to the house of Judah who reject his laws. They're in authority, they're ruling, but... Alright, so I said at verse 11 to 28. Therefore, okay. So the end of 28 was about cutting them off from my presence, which is the concept. It says in other places, taking them out of the book of life. His anger be poured out. Blah blah blah. And actually, 7, I didn't get down to 7, 16, 15. I will fling you from my presence as I flung your brothers, the whole tribe of Ephraim. And for yourself, here again, speaking to Judah, do not supplicate, or for yourself, speaking to Jeremiah, do not supplicate for this people, and do not raise on their account a cry of prayer, and entreat me not, for I will not hear you. Have you not seen what they do in the cities of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem? They follow the queen of skies, the god of seduction, and it just goes on. So in other words, same thing he says in other parts of Jeremiah. Don't pray for him because I'm going to take him out of the book of life, and that's it. Alright. So we expanded the house of Israel, house of Judah, judged, sent in captivity, redeemed, brought back unto Christ, and in time, New Jerusalem. That's the context which you just have to keep going through Jeremiah, and you get that by the time you get up to chapter 33. You read that 5 times. I mean, it's actually there, and I think that was 18 or wherever I was. So at least 5 times you get the same concept, but it just repeats over and over, but with different words. Let's look at Luke 19, 45 to 47. Then entering the temple, he began to drive out the dealers, saying, "It's written, my house, a house of prayer, you've made a den of thieves." Same quotes. And in the temple he continued to teach daily. The chief priests, professors, and leading men, think elders, however, sought to murder him, but they could not find an opportunity because all the people hung on him with the greatest attention. Yeah, so they were trying to send somebody in there just to kill him and smuggle him out and throw him off the cliff or do something with him and just get rid of him one day so they could go back to making money again, because that's all it was about to them. So it says he was too popular because he healed the blind and lame at will. Then quotes the prophecy of Psalms 8:2. I have obtained praise. Okay, Psalms 8:2 though, that was that wasn't from Luke. It was either from Mark or Matthew. I can't recall. So the other quote, that quote, that would have been from Matthew. Okay, Psalms 8:2, I've obtained praise. And then verse 5-7 about Christ, and all Psalms about wheat versus tares, saint versus synagogue. I mean the shield, the stone, and the scepter, wicked to be burnt up, the tares, the chaff. So that's exactly what Psalms, the context of Psalms is. I'm trying to think if I already showed the connection in the Psalms, because all of Psalms, there's only really 4 verses in Psalms that if you notice, it connects all of Psalms together, so you put it all in the context. Let's look at let's start with 8:2 though, because now I'm trying to think where the other one was. I had it bookmarked and turn. Alright, this is Psalms 8:2. Jehovah our Lord, how glorious your hand over all earth you made, and over heaven your fame. From the mouths of the sucklings and babes proceed your strength. Same thing it said in the New Testament. To turn back the rebels and conquer your foes. You know, the ones who revolted from him in the desert, so forth. So Jews against Christ. When I look at the sky your fingers have made, with the moon and stars you have formed, what is man that you think about him? What is Adam's son that you regard? You depressed him below all your saints, then crowned him with honor and might. You placed him over the works of your hand, and you put all things under his feet. So there you go. Second part is about Christ, right? And then the first part was about taking, in other words, the leadership away from the nobles, and he's taking them all out of the book of life, and then he's putting the lowborn into the ones, at any rate, that become the remnant or whatever, into control and authority over his justice system. All flocks, herds, beasts of the field, birds of heaven, fish of the stream, and all whose paths are in the seas. That is a quote from 1 Corinthians. But this part about verse 6 here, I guess it was, is quoted 3 different times from the New Testament. 1 Corinthians 15:27, it's in Ephesians 1:22, and is quoted from Hebrews 2:8. So multiple verses. Some of these have 6 different quotes from the New Testament, plus they're cross-referenced many times as well. Alright, but let's look at the context of what we're looking at here. If you back up, we're in chapter 8, but if you just back up into 7 here, let's go back up to 7:7 is on my page. Let's just look back. Okay. Let's just start with 7:7. Jehovah, rise up in your wrath, in your fury lay hold of my foes, the ones against him. Demand justice for me, assemble the people around, and return to the regions on high. Justify me to the tribes, establish my honor and truth, repay the wicked their wrong, defending the honest, true hearts, okay, and the perfectly honest to God. But that the cross-reference, it says the same thing right over here in chapter 9 of Psalms about destroying the wicked tribes, and the wicked tribes are the wicked of the house of Judah who were against him. And he talks about the rock of Christ over here. Okay, so let's look at this 5. You showed my cause was just, fixed in true light my throne, the throne of David, destroyed the wicked tribes, erased their name from time. You crushed my foemen down, threw down their towns, spoiled their fame. So that's actually Babylon the Great it's talking about. This is an end-time context where he destroys Babylon the Great. And then he mentions the scepter, the shield, and the rock in about 5 different verses here, if you're paying attention. His throne is fixed on right, in other words, righteousness, justice. That's verse 8. So that's the scepter. By right he rules the world, righteousness and justice. By justice governs man. So there's your righteous justice system based on God's law. The Lord protects the weak, that's being the shield. The poor who are oppressed, who trust, your power. Lord, you leave not those who seek. And then the rock, of course, was up in verse 4. In other words, before your face my foes fell back. They fell and were destroyed. In other words, they were destroyed by Christ. And when he destroys your enemies, that's Christ the rock. Same thing on down in 9, talking about the ones who were oppressed, the heathen, and so forth. And if you just back up, you see the same thing. Go back to chapter 5. And we should just start at the beginning. Let's just go on back to chapter 1, and then we'll bump up to 5. Because it starts out, blessed is the man who has not walked beneath the sinner's groves, and not stood at the path of vice, nor sat where scoffers sit. So these are people for Christ, who in Jehovah's law delights and seeks his rules by day and night. So those are the 12 tribes who are for Christ. like trees beside the flowing stream, which bear their fruit in season due. Their leaves fade not, and they succeed in all they undertake to do. Those are all the ones for Christ. Not so the bad. They are like chaff, which winds will drive away. The bad will not attain to rule, nor sinners hold the good. For good men's path the Lord prepares, but breaks the bad men's road. So right there at the beginning, you got the wheat versus the tares. Jews for Christ, Jews against Christ. And then same thing, chapter 2. Why do the heathen rage, and tribes contrive in vain? So those are the Jews against Christ of the house of Judah, or others. The kings of earth collect, princes plan as one. So that's your military coalition against the Lord's Messiah. So there's your military coalition government against what is in the end time, of course, in Revelation, or the saints, the holy, and so forth. So, if you just read through, it's all about getting rid of the tares, getting rid of the bad, keeping the good. So, people think, well, all the good are going to fly away and, be raptured up and that kind of thing. But actually, he's talking about keeping them here. The earth is going to be for them, and he's getting rid of all of the evil. Those are the ones actually that's going to be raptured. The good is not going to be raptured. It's just, I don't know why it's taught that way, but it is. It's obvious from reading it that he's keeping the good. They will be in control, but he's paring them down, like he says, pruning the tree, keeping the good part, getting rid of the bad. It's always about getting rid of the bad, keeping the good. So the good are not going to fly away. The good are not going to miss any judgment. In fact, the good are going to be judged first. That sets up the standard to judge everyone else by. That's the whole concept of judging. Same thing. If you love your son, you'll correct him with a rod and all that kind of thing. So it's the house of God, always judge first, and then the ones that are following his law and do want salvation, all that kind of thing. Whatever remnant, the good part, those are the ones that he judges everyone else by. So that's the concept all throughout Scripture. You wield an iron staff that forms or breaks the pots. That's 9. So now you kings of 10, earth rulers, now reform. With reverence serve the Lord, and trembling rejoice. His son kiss, lest he grieve, and thus your path be lost. If his face lights a spark, all trusting him are blessed. Yeah, wielding an iron staff. So that's, again, idea of the end time, correcting, ruling with an iron rod. 3, 1, Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise on me or against me? How many say about my life, he has no help from God? But you, Lord, are my shielding helm. In other words, my shield. My pride and rising plume. My voice will call the Lord, who from his holy hill replies. That's New Jerusalem. I wait for God is on guard. There again, the shield. Rise up, Lord, save my God, for you can strike my foes. So that's Christ the rock, and break their fierce jaw teeth. Christ the rock. Going down to 4. How long shall men libel my honor, who love falsehood and seek for a lie? But know the Lord's love to the lowly. In other words, the lowborn. The Lord hears when they cry to him. They tremble and practice not sin. So the people who follow his law, the remnant, the lowborn, basically is the way it said it in another verse. You've got the highborn and the lowborn. So the highborn are the 1% in control of everything. The lowborn are the other 99%. That's the way we look at it today, I guess. And then you go down to Psalms 5, verse 4. For you, God, love not wrong, so the wicked hate you. The proud cannot endure the approach of your eyes. You hate slaves of vice. You destroy liars' paths, men of blood and rebellion. There you go. Jews against Christ. But all who are also, we see in other verses, all who are against the 12 tribes and try to kill them, which ends up being Edom, Moabite, Philistines, and others, which are all well defined in Psalms. Their breast is a wide open grave. Now there's another quote from Romans 3:13. With their tongue they utter deceit. Overthrow them, O Lord, by their enemies. Dispersed by numerous sins. Fell those who revolt against you. Again, Jews against Christ. And that's what the concept is. The whole concept, if you just look at the quotes up to the New Testament, where you can see he's talking about the Jews against Christ, and you can come back down here and see that same context here. The ones who were revolted against him, it's usually he says it was his race, or it says something so you understand he's talking about people who were or are part of the 12 tribes, but reject him, in other words. And if you just go through, you'll find that. Psalms 14, well, mine it says 14a, so not sure what verse that might be. 14, 15, yeah, okay, well, that's probably 14, about verse 7 or something. Who gives from Zion to Israel victory when the Lord from captivity brings back his race, then Jacob will be glad, will laugh and Israel be glad. So all 12 tribes brought back from captivity. When your halls shall dwell, who live on your holy hill, okay. They despise people who follow, don't follow God's law. God, guard me, for I trust on you. So I tell the life, you are my prince. So that's the idea of the shield, and the prince is the scepter. And all these things, verses all through here, all go up to the New Testament. The Lord, my rock, my shield, my Savior, my horn, tower. That's Psalms 18. So here you got the shield, the stone, the scepter, all in a couple verses there at the beginning of 18, and so forth. And you have nothing but the rock, the shield, and the scepter all throughout Psalms, plus the ones who are against them or others. And that's the context. Now in another verse, I know where I messed up. Okay. I didn't finish this in 21, 1 through 11. I didn't finish this Psalms. There's two quotes from 21, 1 to 11. I ended at Zechariah, and I was supposed to start there and go through that Psalms 118, 25, 26, and 148, 1, which were quotes from the previous video. We didn't quite finish, and then I was going to show, because in that also connects to those 4 verses, and they're on my Psalms chart. If you look at it, I've got it all laid out there for you. But that helps you to put the whole book of Psalms into context when you can see who because he's specific in those verses about who he's talking to, so you can get a better context. And then you can see also the connections from the New Testament, because you have all these quotes from the New Testament that go to Psalms 118, not just the one verse 21, 1 through 11 in Matthew, but there are others in the New Testament that go back there too and connect to all these dots, and that's how you put Psalms into context, looking at what it quotes from the New Testament. So, but since we're already basically, I don't want to go way on past another 20, 30 minutes going through that, but hopefully I can remember to do that when I pick up on the next video. I'll leave my thing here, and we'll come back on 26, and I'll just write this on here. We'll come back at 26, and we'll look through these other Psalms so we can kind of show a little better how all the Psalms connects together. It's really only one good context in Psalms, and that's Jews against Christ, Jews for Christ, and then the other people like Edomites and so forth who were against the Israelites, and put a lot of effort into destroying, because they want to control those two nations, is what it said about the Edomites especially. But then they get the Ammonites and the other people to go with them to do it. So they all hate the people who follow God's law, in other words. I mean, that's just the context. Alright, so we'll come back with 26 on that. Thank you.